can get blown out by the Cavaliers to end their homestand. On tonight's episode, we discuss the trade deadline, the new look Western Conference, and how the Pelicans have to change their mindset after hearing the new Zion news. Appreciate y'all pulling up. Let's get it. What up? Welcome to this week's episode of Pels Pod, a New Orleans Network podcast. As always, I am your host, Raphael Rattler, joined by my fellow middle brother, Garrick Raphael. What's poppin' with you, bro?
What up, bro? It's good times in the city. Carnival season is in full effect right now, so getting a lot of good vibes, a lot of festive vibes, and everything's all good on this end. It's a good weekend for me. Happy Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania to everybody who celebrates. It is that week for that, as well as Zulu Ball coming up, Bacchus Ball, and you know how those things go around the time. So it's a pretty good week for me, man. Pretty good week coming up. I'm excited about all the things that are coming up for us, and it should be fun. How's everything on your end, bro?
Everything is good. Everything's blessed. I'm excited to go home this week. I'm excited to eat good, have a little Mardi Gras spirit, because God knows I need it right now. You know who else needs it? The New Orleans Pelicans. But before we get too far into the show, make sure you guys follow us on Twitter at Pels Pod, follow us on IG at Pels Podcast, like the episode below, and most importantly, subscribe to New Orleans Network. So the Pelicans started the week off strong, right? You played against Atlanta Hawks team, which, middling of the road, but not necessarily a bad team, just one that never really can establish any type of consistency, right? A ton of talent on that team. They're always in trade rumors. But it's one that you played and you kind of needed to win just to continue to build off the confidence from the games past. And so B.I. picks off where he leaves off in that Hawks game. You saw Herb do an excellent job on Trae Young and really agitate him and stop him from getting to his spots and really, really make him play uncharacteristically to some pieces. And so you go into that Hawks game and you're like, man, like this is one where if you could just stack this one, that's the next domino for the Pelicans. And so ultimately the Pelicans win that game and you're feeling good going into the Cavs game. But were there any other things that you saw from that Cavs game that the Pelicans could take with them, as they approach, this after All-Star break team?
Yeah, it was a really good, well-rounded game from the Pels. I think the people who you expected to do certain things did certain things, right? You saw Herb with tremendous lockdown. And shout out to Herb, man, because I know DeJounte Murray is like, man, if I don't ever have to see this guy again, it would be nice. He put the fear of God and had nightmares for DeJounte Murray in that play-in game, against the Spurs, and it was not great. The last couple games to get into the last season, it wasn't great for him. But all in all, man, listen, you saw her make it difficult for Trae. That's about the best you could do is kind of try to cut off the head of their snake, which is Trae Young. And Herb did that, right? He made it hard for Trae to do anything other than pass the ball. He had a number of assists, but Herb was making him inefficient, and that's the kind of way that you beat the Hawks, by making Trae Young be inefficient, because he's one of those streaky guys that gets rolling. And you saw good for Herb, and again, seeing B.I. kind of turn back into B.I. and see some of those performances that you saw last year, as well as this year when he's been able to be on the court, was good. Was good for the team, for that game. It was good to kind of see him continue some of that good play moving forward. And you figure like this was the time where, you can kind of build on some things and move forward. And then the healthy Cavs team rolled in, and
Yeah. So before we get into that game, first of all, the Cavs are a tough matchup for the Pelicans, even with Zion. Like, what has been the formula to, if you're going to slow down Zion and make things difficult, is to have a lot of tall bodies inside that can help build the wall and to be able to have a pick and roll offense that can take advantage of the Pelicans' lack of rim protection. Where the Cavs happen to have both of those things at an extremely high level and having an incredible backcourt and having two of the younger excelling players in the league in their front court. So going into the game, it's already difficult. And you saw, the Cavs coach, he mentioned it during the broadcast. He said, the way the Pelicans are defending us, we've got to make them pay, which is the drop coverage from JV. And in this particular game, again, it leads into the trade deadline or lack thereof for the Pelicans. You see the glimpses of what JV looks like in the pick and roll. When you have someone who can exploit it and you have a lob threat on the other end, it almost feels as if there's only so much he can do. Like, he's just not equipped to defend at that level. And so what are teams going to do in the playoffs? They're just going to draw that out over and over and over. And so to Larry Nance's credit, again, he defended it the best he could, but he can't play the entire game. And so this game is really illuminating more from the weaknesses of the Pelicans and the things that they don't do well than the actual score. Because again, the Pelicans didn't play well. Like, they were out hustled. Like, there were so many offensive rebounds, so many loose balls where the Cavs were the first to the floor and things like that. Very uncharacteristic of their effort. Willie Green was pissed in the pregame or the postgame presser. Like, that's not Pelicans basketball. The Pels didn't play their best game or give their best effort, but still, those weaknesses really kind of stood out to me. So, was there anything you took from the Cavs game that the Pels either have to work on or have to figure out an answer to for the rest of the season?
Well, there's not going to be an answer for the pick and roll coverage. It'll be for this now that the trade deadline has passed, unless there's some buyout player that I'm not seeing right now. It's going to be a problem now. It is going to be an issue. It's something that we talked about ad nauseum on here about, when JV does the drop coverage with these superstar guards and wings, giving them a half step to a full step of either, catching, getting full head of steam or being able to play in the mid range. With the mid range being a part of a lot of people's game now, it is almost impossible for JV to cover these guys. And so, you saw that. And like you said about the Cavs, right? The Cavs have literally the blueprint, right? You saw last season, it was the Cavs that made Coach Willie Green go into the Jackson Hayes at the 4 with the center starting. And it was him. It was that team that made them kind of like move into that era for that season. And you saw Jackson do that. Well, Jackson do well in that position. Well, it is the Cavs who are uniquely designed as a team, right? They have 2 shot blockers, but like their 4 is not, he could be a 5, but he's an excellent 4 in Evan Mobley. He has touch around the rim. He has touch shooting the ball, and he's defensive minded, right? And so you have those 2 guys. So when you're starting, Zion and JV, it's more about strength versus length at that point. So, you're going to miss out on some rebounds. Well, when you take Zion out and put in Trey Murphy at the 4 or Herb at the 4, however you want to look at it, you're not going to do well against a team that is, dominant on the boards and things like that. JV can't box out 2 people at once. And so you saw Evan Mobley get boards, and then JV started boxing out him, and here comes Jared Allen getting boards and putbacks. And so they're a team that is uniquely positioned to have to give the Pelicans issues, right? Especially when you talk about the backcourt with Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell. Herb can only guard one. He can only guard one player at one time. And so so he can't guard Evan Mobley and box out Evan. It's just a lot of holes that the Pels are weak in, especially right now with Zion hurt, that the Cavs took really, really big advantage of. And so you saw that, couple that with the lack of effort, right? The guys who are on the team, you can't have a lack of effort with this team, right? There are so many guys who are so good at, one thing, but aren't great at this. And, maybe they are okay at that, but not good at this. the one thing that all of the team can do well is play with effort, right? Everybody on the team can play with effort. And those guys just got outworked. So, between the Cavs not, being uniquely suited in order to expose some of the Pelicans' weaknesses, as well as the Pels not bringing their best game, it was a recipe for a disaster. And you kind of saw that in the scoreboard.
Right. So it was kind of a lip duck way to limp into the trade deadline, right? Which immediately got popping off when KD gets traded to the Suns. But all day long, you're waiting to see the Pelicans going to make a move and Pelicans going to make it. Again, I'm not that surprised that some big move wasn't made, but they did end up making a move, right? And one of it was moving off Devontae Graham in favor of Josh Richardson. So Devontae Graham and 4 second round pick, which is wild. Did that throw you off any that every team kept traded 4 second round pick and 5? Like they just don't mean anything?
Man, I think we're seeing the fact that people are starting to care more about first round picks. And they're trying to preserve them as much as possible. You saw Drew Holiday go for not Drew Holiday. Who did we trade? Who did the Pelicans trade for like a bunch of? I think it was Mirotic, right? Mirotic was was one of those guys got traded, and they got a bunch of second round, but that was like a while ago. And now you're starting to see the birth of second round picks coming back, and it's crazy. It was wild to see some of the guys being moved for how many second round picks. I'm like, man, they throwing those things around like they beads at the parade, man. You get a second round.
Jay Crowder hadn't played all season and went for 5 second round picks.
Crazy. I guess teams are seeing, as open as the NBA is with so many good teams and teams that are competing, that they're like, all right, well, we're gonna go in all in on it, but it's like a soft all in. We're not gonna give you any first. Maybe a whole bunch of seconds.
Right. And so in the Pelicans case, on the surface, it looks like a salary dump because you're trading Devontae Graham, who still has time left on his contract, who, for all the, I guess not the hatred, but just the lack of fan or sportsmanship when it comes to Devontae Graham. Again, I still don't think he ever really got the experience he was brought in to have, where he wasn't supposed to create. He was just supposed to be a catch and shoot player. Never really got that because Zion wasn't really healthy throughout his tenure. And so I think he got a bad shake. And to his credit, shout out to him for dropping 31 in his debut versus the Spurs. But for all intents and purposes, it didn't really work out here, right? So everyone says, well, can you move off the salary? You don't want to go into the luxury tax at this point or next year if you don't have to. And so you look at that and you say that's a salary dump. But then you look at the player you got back, Josh Richardson, on a contract that's expiring. And you say, well, what are the things that the Pelicans really value? They value defense. They value length. That's a player who, from his Miami Heat days, you and I watched him a ton as a rookie coming out of Tennessee. Those are the first things that come off the page when you think of Josh Richardson. His ability to defend, be versatile. He's really improved on his three-point shot up until the point where him and Devontae's three-point percentage are about the same. And so you're getting a player who's not only taller, more athletic, able to help you on the defensive end, but I also think his offensive profile is different from Devontae. We talked about it a couple of episodes ago. Devontae's more of a catch and shoot player than let me create or let me, shoot off the dribble or anything like that. Josh Richardson, he loves to get him up from three, and he can create a little bit more than Devontae Graham, probably because he's a lot bigger than Devontae. So what did you see out of the trade? What do you think about Josh Richardson, and how do you think this plays out with the Pelicans?
Yeah, I agree. Listen, Devontae was brought here to be the shooter. And whichever way you want to think about that, he was brought to be the shooter in New Orleans, and he never got that opportunity, right? Between Brandon Ingram's injuries and Zion's injuries and just not having a full roster in order to kind of see how he would fit as like the tertiary player on a bench mob of catching and shooting, right? He was asked to do a lot that he wasn't comfortable with. And so, his tenure with the Pelicans was, shaky, but he provided with a lot of moments, big shots, game winners, things like that. So he did some of the things that he was brought into, but he never got that fair shake like you said, what up, Bird Talk? How you doing, man? So yeah, you transpose it over to Josh Richardson, right? A longer guard, an athletic guard. When Miami drafted him, a couple of years ago, he was kind of brought in to be like the third ball handler, right? He was there to kind of create. That's what his intentions of being drafted by the Heat. That's what they were doing, and they played him like that, right? There was a couple times where he would be the focal point of a Miami offense without D Wade on the out there, and without Jimmy Butler when he was there. A couple of times, not Jimmy Butler, D Wade and who the other guy that was there. I forget. They had another guy there, but he was that third guy to kind of run that offense with them. And so I think when you bring him to the Pelicans, like you said, you get a better wing player. A guy that's more wing than guard. Like he has guard skills, but he's more of a wing body. So you can have him guard, wings. You can have him guard guards, things like that. So he'll be a better opportunity there. You think about some of those times where you saw Jose and Devontae on the floor together and the way that they attacked Devontae on the defensive end. I don't think you'll have that issue with Josh Richardson. And he's a guy that is confident, right? He knows, he knows the way to play. He's a guy that you can slide in and kind of be malleable in all the rotations. Obviously, he doesn't really address the glaring issue for the Pelicans, which is rim protection. But I do think that his defensive skills will help in not having many people have free reign to the basket outside of the guys that Herb is guarding. I think he'll be able to step in and kind of help with that. And so it's a money move. You can see it as a money move. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think, that's a prudent move. What I do think, and I guess I'll pose this question to you to go into what we'll be talking about later with Zion's hamstring. It does raise the question that, did the organization kind of have an idea that, Zion's hamstring wasn't, going to be something that he'd be able to come back the next day or play before the All-Star break. And so, with that being the case, was it prudent to not go all in and go for that trade for the guy that might address the rim protection or things like that, and to make that trade because you knew Zion's injury was going to take a little bit more time for him to get back from? I'm wondering, and we could get into that once we talk about Zion's hamstring, but the trade for Josh Richardson is fine for me. It's a guy that can help you this year, and his contract being off the books, and as well as Devontae's contract being off the books, will help you this offseason, moving into next season as well. So I think it was a prudent move that a lot of people would look at and say, okay, well, you didn't really address anything, you didn't address the things, but I think in a vacuum, Josh Richardson is fine. To have him kind of come in and take some of those Devontae minutes, I think it's a pretty decent move. If somebody was going to do it, Josh Richardson is a player that I wouldn't mind be the guy to take those Devontae minutes. So in a vacuum, the trade is fine. It doesn't address the glaring issues, but I do think that he'll be able to contribute in ways that Devontae couldn't.
I agree. Again, you look at the stats, and nothing about his stats so far this season jumps off the page, but you also have to recognize that he was playing on a team that didn't have a whole lot of talent, and so
they incentivized to lose. They lost 14 in a row up until today, or 13 in a row up until today.
Right. So a lot of what he was able to create offensively will be a lot easier, playing next to Brandon Ingram, CJ McCollum, and eventually Zion Williamson. And so you mentioned it. Did they do enough? Griff came out and said, now's not the time to go all in. And the question is that because they knew about Zion's injury or not? I'm of the mindset Zion's injury didn't really dictate how they were making moves, because I think if you know what the all-in move is, and Griff in his very Griff way, had his conversation with the media and said they weren't really in the market for a big splash. I think that he's right in that you don't always know when the right move is, but you know when it's not the right time, right? And so even if Zion was to come back at the All-Star break, there's still a lot of questions to be answered about the team that you already have. And so to me, it made sense, and we've been talking about it for months leading up to this point, that you kind of play this season out. You don't have a lot of obligations. You pretty much have the exact same team going into next year as well. minus some extra salary that you can use somewhere else. And you figure out the move at that point, because still you're, 60% done with the season and you don't really know where you're at in the first place. And so for a team that hasn't won a playoff series, their best two players haven't been on the court. Zion's missed most of the season. BI's missed most of the season. That never added up to let's go trade it all in for a player, right?
Yeah. And that's a good point. It reminds me a lot of what the Suns went through this season, right? Mm-hmm. The Suns, they lost a lot of players to injury. Devin Booker, Chris Paul went down. Cam Johnson was hurt. They lost a lot of players to the trade to injury. And so they dropped in the standings. You remember Phoenix was on that meteoric drop in the standings where they were losing because they didn't have their players. And it could have been very easy for those guys, for James Jones and that front office, to go in and get an OG Anunoby or Bogdanovich, trade all their capital away, and go get one of those guys. But they waited, they played it out. And when the situation, the all-in move presented itself, because they hadn't made a move for OG Anunoby or Bogdanovich, when they were sliding down the standings, they were in position to make the trade that'll put them, theoretically put them over and make the all-in move. And so when you look at the Pelicans and the guys, the reason, like when they're healthy, they were the number one seed. When they aren't, they drop down the standings. It's very easy to have said, well, go in and get Bogdanovich, go in and get OG Anunoby, because it fixes right now. It fixes what we're seeing on the court. The main issue with, is winning, right? Scoring and all of that. But they also didn't have their best players. And so if you make that trade, you put yourself in a position where that is your team moving forward, and you have no room to do anything to wiggle or do anything. Well, now, with the Pelicans, kind of shaving off some salary towards the end, obviously, with Zion, if Zion is not 100% and it can't play on the hammy, the Pelicans probably are not going to win the championship anyway, regardless of if you make a move for OG or Pascal or Gary Trent or Bogdanovich, or Bojan Bogdanovich. But what it does is it ties you up, right? It says, okay, well, this is your team. You don't win a championship this year and you still don't have any rim protection. Well, you have very few options to kind of move, especially if you're giving up 2 and 3 first rounders for these guys. So, again, like you said, I think it was, if you look at the big picture, obviously, small view, and, this season started off so promising, and now you're starting to see how the injury bug has kind of, taken some of the air out of those sails. The Pelicans are still within 2, 3, 4 games in the losers column of catching fourth or catching third. And so, you play this season out, you see exactly what you need. You go into the playoffs, you know exactly what you need at the end of those seasons, at the end of the season, and you strike, maybe in the off season, or you wait until next trade deadline. But I think, like you said, all in all, with the team not being so young and haven't been proven, as you talk about, the guys who are on the team, their best accolades, outside of CJ and JV, their best accolades is losing to Phoenix in the first round in 6, or not playing in the playoffs at all. When you have a team like that, to go all in with guys still hurt and not proving anything, and the team is not proving anything, I think it was right to make the trade towards the end of the bench, relieve some salary and move on like that.
I mean, the thing that I look at is you can't be mad at Griff for not getting a lot of return back from Lonzo, because you say he gave it away or whatever it may be. But then also be mad at him when he's stingy with the assets that he has, right? Like he said, the costs were too high. What did we say leading up until trading deadline? Like Griff has been operating from a position for power for like a year and some change, right? He wasn't giving Billy away. He wasn't giving players away. He was probably making asks that are more ridiculous than not. And so if that's the case, it never really added up. The other part is, for a team that's never been in the luxury tax, I don't think a 7th place team, for a team that hasn't won a playoff series in multiple years, is going to be the year that they say, you know what, this is the year we're going to the luxury tax. Like that just never added up from that standpoint. So really is the question as well, what do you do now, right? So there's no more moves to be made. To your point, maybe there's a buyout candidate. No pick and roll center help is coming, right? And so you're done with. I see somebody in the chat saying this is your team moving forward. So you have to figure it out. You have to figure out the answers internally. To your point, Jax was dead in the water last year, and all of a sudden the Cavs series they found they had to go big, and then Jackson's starting playoff games. Like, that's kind of how the end of seasons go. And so you look at things, you say, okay, you've got Larry Nance, but you're betting on his health, right? We've already seen him take some tumbles to the ground. And if you're not betting on that, then you're betting on Jackson's growth, which he's doing behind the back layup drills at the end of games. And so if you're not betting on that, you're betting on JV getting better feet somehow, right? And so there's not a whole lot of answers unless they plan to really play Zion at the 5, because we've heard it from Larry Nance. We've heard it from players earlier in the season, back when we saw Zion. That may have to be their option, right? Because there's just not an answer on the team. And so the bigger question with all of those things happening is this: what do you do now that the teams in the West all got better? The Suns obviously get better. Now, it'll take some time for them to gel, I think, because they literally are a brand new team. The core pieces of their team are gone, and now you're adding a KD, who again is also coming off an injury. So it's going to take some time for them to gel. The Clippers got better. The Mavericks get Kyrie. The Nuggets shore up their bench. The Wolves get better. They get Cat back. The Warriors didn't really make any moves, but they got some defense back. And so my question to you is, like, do the Pels still have one of the best rosters in the West after all of that movement, and the Pels once again stand pat for the most part?
This is going to be a unpopular take, but I still think they do. I still think they do. I think, obviously, and listen, the story of if healthy, right? When they're healthy.
The famous tagline.
Everybody is tired of it, and I, including myself, I am one. But I think that if you look from top to bottom, it's hard to see it because you haven't seen it in a while. But there's not a long list of players who are better than Zion. There's not a long list of second options that are better than Brandon Ingram. There's not a long list of third options that are better than CJ McCollum. There's not a long list of fourth options that are better than Jonas Valanciunas. Those players are on the team. Now, they hurt, and I understand that, and we'll get into injuries and things because I have something to say about that as well. But if you just look at the roster, and the team is a well-built team. Any national, I've heard it from countless national broadcasters, right? Jeff Van Gundy has said it. JJ Redick has said it about the roster construction of the Pelicans. It is phenomenal, right? You have shooters, you have defenders, you have energy guys. The thing that makes the team work, though, is that everybody was put into a role. When you don't have Zion and Brandon Ingram, and for times at large extended times, you see guys have to step up and play in, and their shots are valued at a certain amount because they have to put in points. You look at the Mavericks right now, right? They had a lot of times where, like, Reggie Bullock and those guys had to cobble up and be the second option on a night or the third option on a night. Well, now that Kyrie is there, those guys are so much more comfortable because they know, along with Luka's numbers, there's another guy there you're going to get at least 20 points per game from this guy. And so now the Reggie Bullocks of the world, the Josh Green, like those guys can play freely. Right. Those guys can play freely because they have their two stars, the 2 point. You don't have that with the Pelicans. And I understand that it doesn't look like that right now. But when the Pelicans were healthy, when Zion was playing, you saw a team that people were saying that this is a Western Conference. They could win the Western Conference. They weren't saying like, oh, this is a young, scrappy team that might do some things. And so, it sucks, right? Because the injuries are there. But my thing about the roster the way it is that you couldn't make an all-in trade without confirming to yourself that Zion and Brandon Ingram were healthy. That is the only reason you make an all-in trade, because you believe that both of those guys are going to be healthy, because you do not win anything without Zion and Brandon Ingram being healthy, being on the floor together. So this roster as it is, I do think it is one of the deepest. I see somebody say, I think that's a good way to say it, that is one of the deepest, but maybe not the best because of health issues, because of not having the experience, right? You have all of those things that play into that. But I think if you, in a totality, if you look at the roster, when these guys, and I'm banking on the fact that the players are going to be healthy when the playoffs come, cross your fingers, that when the playoffs come, those guys will be healthy. I think when everybody gets healthy and the playoffs tip off, ask the Grizzlies, ask the Nuggets if they want to see the healthy Pelicans team in a 1-8 series. Ask the Grizzlies if they want to see a healthy Pelicans team in a 2-7 series. Ask the Kings if they want to see a healthy Pelicans team in a 3-6 series. You know, those teams, if the Pelicans get into the playoffs and get healthy, they have one of the most dangerous rosters on the team. And I know it doesn't look that way because you don't never see it and everything. But if you're just looking at the roster, and if these guys can get healthy, if the Pelicans can somehow get into the dance and get healthy when it's time to dance, I think that nobody wants to, no team wants to see them in the first round. And so, I get it. Everybody wants to say, point fingers. If bad things happen, you have to have a finger to point to point at. But I just think that this Pelicans roster is still one of the more well-built rosters when healthy, with the little asterisk mark.
Right. I heard Nick Friedel from ESPN said the Pelicans were done. And I just kind of took a second back, because I'm like, wait a minute. This is the same team, like literally the same. No, Josh Richardson just joined the team, but Dyson Daniels is hurt. Zion Williamson is hurt. Those are the only two additions from this offseason. So it's literally the same team that after the All-Star break, everyone was like, well, this team is dangerous. And they had this team from the beginning of the year, they wouldn't even be in the play, stuff like that. So all of a sudden, that same team is not that good. And so to me, like, I think it's wild, to your point, when people jump to those conclusions so quickly when, again, you haven't seen it. Now, to your point, you're not going to give them credit where credit is not due. Like, you got to be available to play. Nobody's saying, hey, you are what your record is. Like, you're a barely above 500 team, because that's who's been able to be on the court, right? But to your point, until I see somebody able to stop Zion Williamson, and in the same game, able to stop Brandon Ingram, and in the same game, be able to stop CJ McCullough, I'm going to go with that team, because, again, to your point in roster construction, the reason why the Pelicans are dangerous, because you got those three guys, and then the rest of the roster are scrappy defensive players. And so where I would bet on the Pelicans, if fully healthy, and everyone is as well, is when they're playing the Nuggets and they're playing the Suns and they're playing the Grizzlies. Well, they're giving you 80 points from those three players. They also got guys to defend on the back end your best player and make it tough for your best player. Whereas if the Nuggets are guarding Zion difficult, then who's guarding Brandon Ingram? Like, right. They don't have a defensive answer for everything that you have. If the Suns, if KD's giving you buckets and Zion's matching him, who's guarding Brandon Ingram now? Devin Booker, because Mikal Bridges doesn't play for them anymore, right? And so, like, if I'm going tit for tat and everybody's healthy, I do think the Pelicans have one of the deepest rosters in the NBA, but it's set up very well, to your point as well. And so I agree with you. It's an unpopular opinion right now. Times seem rough, but all it takes is winning in this league to change anything. And so if the Pelicans rattle up a couple before the break and come out of the break like they did last year, I think people will change their tune once again. And so you have to talk about it. Zion's injury. You and I were talking about, we were getting ready to have this pod and talk about how things were a little bit murky because news was supposed to come out, and then Zion wasn't at the game, and normally he's always at the game, and there was a lot of things that just randomly didn't happen that were supposed to happen, and it made you think, something's going on. Well, the injury news happens that Zion has re-aggravated his injury. Again, the people who want to are going to jump to the, oh, well, he's always hurt and this, that, and the other. But in reality, if you isolate the injury, this is an injury that often people get re-injured on, right? Like Devin Booker, it already happened this year. Like a lot of people re-injured their hamstring. It's a very common thing to do, and he did it while working out. But the main thing is he'll be out multiple weeks even after the All-Star break. And so, again, it's got to be disappointing for him. Guy gets an All-Star starter. He's on his way to first team or second team All-NBA, MVP discussions, get hurt. It's got to be hard for the team because they're riding the momentum, number one team in the West, and then they lose both their stars. It's tough on the fan base because they're so invested now, and they're not able to see their top-notch product. But I look at the schedule, and the Pelicans have one of the easier schedules in the West down the stretch. And I'm looking at like the March 12th game with Portland. That's like a full 4 weeks from today, as like the earliest I could see it happening. So that puts it with like 15 games to go, right? And you're assuming the Pelicans can, at the very worst, tread water during the games in between, like go 500, and at the very best, maybe win a couple games over 500. But with 15 games to go, I'm not even talking about making the play-in or making the playoffs at all. I'm just asking, is that enough time for the team to really gel? Because again, you haven't seen CJ as a third option. BI, for the most part, has been the number one option because when he's been here, he was the number one option. He gets hurt. He comes back. Zion's out. He's the number one option to finish last year. He's the number one option. So some adjustment there as well. Is that enough time to get in the groove, work out the kinks, make the playoffs in the first place, and make a run at it?
I think it's enough time to make the playoffs. It's not enough time to group to gel, though. And what I mean by make the playoffs is that I think if they all get on the court, they'll be so good, they'll be good enough to where they'll win games, but it won't be pretty. Like they'll never be that seamless offense this season at least because they just don't have the time. But it's funny because when you listen to like Rui Hachimura, right? Rui Hachimura was talking about the game against the Lakers versus the Warriors. And he was saying that like the Lakers won that game. And that was the first game that all of their new additions played, right? D'Lo started, Jared Vanderbilt played, Malik Beasley played. I don't think Mo Bamba played. He still has a suspension from a fight that he had with the Magic. But three, most of that. And they won the game. And Rui talked about it after the game. He was like, man, we were just out there hooping. Like we were just out there hooping. But the talent, right? Instead of having guys who don't fit or guys who weren't playing or guys that done well, you had guys who were playing with energy. And Vanderbilt, you had shooters. Obviously, Malik Beasley didn't make a lot of shots, but he was taking the shots, right? And that's a more confident shooter. D'Lo is a much better fit with LeBron, and LeBron didn't play, but a better fit with LeBron and AD in that. So they were just out there hooping. And I think that is what you're going to see a lot of if and when Zion gets back. It's going to be those guys just like, all right, Zion is really good. Brandon Ingram is really good. CJ is really good. Let's just like win these games and we'll figure out the beautiful poetry offense at some other time, in the offseason or something. Because 15 games is not enough. We talked about it like before the season started. A lot of season started. Before the season started, it was going to take like, hey, once they get to like game 20, like game 30 together, you'll start to see more. Well, we're talking about 15 games, and if you play all 15 with those guys,
games at the end, yeah,
exactly, and you play all 15 with those guys, and added the couple games that they played together before BI got hurt in the beginning of the season. You're talking about like 20, 25 games, maybe at the most, that they've played together this season, and that's just not enough time to kind of gel, especially when it's 5 here and then 10 here, and it's not like 25 straight games. So it won't be enough. It's not going to be enough time for them to look like the pretty offense that everybody I think is envisioning when you have all of these guys to score. But I do think that the talent is going to be good enough. And again, to Brendan's point in the comments, a lot of teams are dealing with the same thing, right? Phoenix is going to be dealing with the same thing. Dallas is going to be dealing with the same things. Obviously, Denver didn't make like a huge move, but they made moves around the edges. Bones Highland is no longer there. So all of these guys are going to be figuring out new teams and new rotations throughout the season. And so, like, if with Zion's hammy though, I want to say one thing about Zion's hamstring before we move on. When the Pelicans hired Aaron Nelson and that staff from the Phoenix Suns, it was lauded as one of the best hires that the Pelicans could have made, right? He was one of those guys, and his staff is renowned for keeping guys on the floor. Greg Hill credited Aaron Nelson and their guys to his success. Shaq as well with his time in Phoenix, extending his career. He credited Aaron Nelson and his staff to do that. So when you look at some of these injuries that are happening, when bad things happen, again, like I said earlier, people need a finger to point to, right? They need somebody to say this or something to be like, this is why this happened. And so you look at, people saying that it's Griff situation. It's a fire the medical staff. And my thing is, if you fire the medical staff, and again, whatever the Pelicans do, they don't care about what I say. My opinion doesn't matter at all. But if you fire the medical staff, you're going to have to show me a guy or in the history of the world, in the history of medicine, who can say, I know how to stop hamstrings from being pulled. I know how to do it. Because that guy is ready, or that lady, that man or woman, is going to make a lot of money in life. Because if you know how to prevent things like that from happening, then you got the key to life. And so some of these injuries that happen, right? Like you spoke about this injury to him, to Zion, this hamstring injury. It's something that happens, right? And sometimes bad things happen and you don't have anybody to point a finger to. If you want to point the finger to somebody, point to Zion's hamstring, because that's what has caused it. It's not Zion. Everybody has said Zion has taken his conditioning, his training, his weight. Everybody in the world, coming into this year, it was lauding and Zion about what he did. So you can't say it's that, right? The team is well suited to be around him. So it's not Zion having to do so much and a lot and things like that. It's a freak accident that happens. It sucks. It is not ideal to the season that the Pelicans want to have, but it's something that happens. And you think about some of the guys who get, Kevin Durant is one of the hardest workers on the planet, one of the greatest players ever, and every single year he gets a lower body injury. Every single year he gets a lower body injury. Are you going to question his work ethic? Are you going to question the medical staff of the Nets or the medical staff of the Warriors? These things happen, right? It's basketball. It's physical. People are jumping. People are cutting at high speeds. People are colliding. Injuries happen, and sometimes it's no one's fault. So what the Pelicans can do now that they know that Zion isn't walking in that door anytime soon, you have to know that guy isn't coming. And I'm seeing comments about, he's big and KD's not built. So if he's big and not built like and built like a defensive end and those things, were you saying those things when he was giving 40 to the Timberwolves? Were you saying those things in the game that he got injured? Zion had like 25 points through three quarters. Like he was balling. Like it's not like, you know what I'm saying? He's balling. Like he was balling. So you can't tell me his weight and everything was a problem then. Not a problem then when he was dropping 40 and 30 and winning Western Conference Player of the Week and things like that. And say that also, that's the reason that his hamstring tore. Hamstring got pulled. And I just don't believe that. Devin Booker is not built like a defensive end, and his hamstring hurts every time he plays basketball. So I just think that, everybody wants a finger to point at somebody, and I understand, I get it, and it's frustrating that you want to point the finger at people, but I just think it was a freak accident and a freak injury that happened to a guy who dealt with foot injuries, who dealt with knee injuries, and I just think that is something that you have to deal with. So the Pelicans, they know that Zion isn't walking through that door. They can have a similar vibe to last year. Strap your boots up, and you have to win the games that you can win. Starting possibly tonight.
I 1000% agree. But something on a more upbeat topic. Here's a question that I think is pretty interesting about this roster. Let's say, I'm not even going to say that. At some point, the Pelicans are healthy. Who's your 10th guy down the stretch? Like CJ, BI, Herb, Zion, JV, Trey, Larry, Najee. They're probably going to play. But then you got like Josh Richardson now and Kyra Lewis and Dyson Daniels. Like, somebody's not playing. Like, in the playoff series, you're not going 12 to 13 deep. And so I saw someone saying this is one of the deepest roster. Somebody who's really good is going to get DNPs. Off the top of your head, who do you think it is?
I think Dyson plays. I think Dyson plays because I think he has proven to Willie, if we know anything about Willie, you have to prove to him that you can get on the floor. And the last that we saw of Dyson, he was diving on the floor in Miami, trying to keep the team afloat.
Almost won the game by himself. Yeah,
right. And so I think that has brought him, especially with his weight. I mean, with his height and his, his ability to defend up and down the floor. I think that Josh Richardson is going to get a shot while the guys are hurt to see if there's something there with him. But as tough as it is to say, man, like I think that he's going to rely on Jose, the way he finished out that Phoenix. And I think Kyra's going to be the guy that, is not going to get those minutes. I think he's going to be the guy, obviously with Jackson and Billy, that you look at and say, okay, well, those are going to be your end of the bench guys. Because I do think Dyson can fill in that point guard role, but also be, his height and his wingspan and things. So I think Kyra, Jackson, and Billy are going to be those guys at the end of the bench. But I think Kyra's that odd man out who's playing now, who won't be playing then.
See, my answer to the question, if you listen to this podcast, is the same. I think it should depend on the matchup. Like I
agree with that.
When you have a deep roster where you trust 13 or 12 of the guys to play, especially in the playoffs where matchups are everything, I think you should dictate it based on what's giving you the best option that night or in that series. Again, Willie Green, up until this point, it's interesting you bring up, what Dyson's been able to show, but Willie Green has also had a tendency to lean on veterans. And so I think that gives Josh Richardson a leg up as well. But if Kyra's doing what he's doing right now, where he's sparking energy and he's able to get I think that is something that Willie Green really needs to think about in terms of, his versatility and being able to play different guys through different matchups, which you saw him do in the playoff series. Guys that like Jackson, stuff like that, played all series, don't play or don't play the next game or whatever it is. So it'll be interesting to see. So the Pels are in a very similar situation. Exactly 1 year ago, Josh Hart comes out and he's like, we can't wait for Zion. Zion's not coming to save us. And so with this exact team, plus Josh Richardson, they won 13 out of 23 after the All-Star break. They were top 10. We talk about being both top 10 in offense and defense for this season. Well, they did that after the All-Star break last year. Brandon Ingram was averaging 25, 6, and 7 in the All-Star break. And so, to me, I don't think this is a question of whether or not this team is going to, make the play-in or make the playoffs. I think even without Zion, they're going to make at least the play-in, depending on what seed that might differ. But my question to you is, how do they stay out of the play-in? How do they position themselves to do well and excel, not relying on Zion to come back, and more so he's the sweetener on top, and you can try to push higher in the top 6 seeds to finish the season?
To quote the great philosopher Brandon Xavier Ingram, I don't have to fit in. Just give me the ball. And that's your answer. Brandon Ingram, this is why, you pay a Brandon Ingram, CJ. Zion, as phenomenal and as great of a talent as he is, I think that he shouldn't be the reason you win or lose 10 in a row. Like, you should be able to get some of those games with a CJ, with JV, things like that. So moving forward, now that the team understands that Zion isn't walking the door, this isn't something where, we just need to tread water for 4 or 5 games until he walks through the door. No, this is your team now. The trade deadline is gone. You saw Willie Hernangomez kind of post, hey, look, I'm locked into the playoff run. I think everybody needs to adopt that same, that same mentality. Like, listen, this is the team. Brandon Ingram has to do a little bit more. CJ has to do a little bit more. JV, you have to get him involved offensively. You have to make him a force on the offensive end to replay some of those points and paint control that you're missing with Zion. Everybody has to do a little more. You see in Trey Murphy kind of get a little better, right? Get a little more comfortable on the offensive end. Still got some work to do on the defensive end, but he's getting better on the offensive end, feeling more comfortable, taking more threes, taking more shots overall. Everybody has to do a little bit more. And the thing about it is that not only is the team comfortable with doing a little bit more, they've been there. They've been there to do a little bit more and have to play without Zion. So coming out of the All-Star break, I think the All-Star break is going to be really good for this team because everybody can step back. Okay, Zion's not coming through. There are no All-Stars going to Salt Lake City outside of Trey and Jose for the Rising Stars game. Yeah, for the Rising Stars games and things like that. But those guys can step back. They can kind of regroup, take a deep breath, gather themselves, and know this is we have this amount of games to go. Zion isn't walking in the door anytime soon. Everybody has to do a little bit more, and it starts with your leaders. It starts with Brandon Ingram doing more on the offensive end and the defensive end. Same with CJ, and also getting JV involved, getting him, touches in the paint offensively, so that when he does, inevitably get attacked on the defensive end, he's still, still engaged in the game, because you're giving him shots on the offensive end. So there are ways for this team to continue to win. Again, like I said before, win the games you're supposed to win. Win the games that you're supposed to win when you have advantages and very glaring advantages. Take advantage of them. Become more predatory on offense. Hunt the mismatches. Let Brandon Ingram and CJ play in the ways that they are comfortable playing. You no longer have, okay, we can just throw to Zion and get a bucket. You have to let these guys play in the positions in the way that they are comfortable playing. Get in the transition offense, and you do that by playing defense. Bring the energy, play defense, get these guys in transition, and you have a shot to win all your games, if not, most of your games, if not all of them. As long as you do that, you have two closers in Brandon Ingram and CJ. So as long as you can keep the game close, you have Brandon Ingram and CJ to take it home. What you can't do is have these quarters where you're losing the quarter by 10, 15 points, and you're down 15, 20 before anybody can really work up a sweat. And then you spend the whole time trying to get back into the game, and you fizzle out at the end. You have to come out and with energy and defense and get the guys involved that need to get involved. And everybody just has to do more.
All right. I'm going to take the opposite approach. I think everybody just needs to do what they do best. I think this team, even without Zion and with Dyson coming back, eventually as well, it's a good team. Like, I think it's constructed well. The pieces match up, again, even without Zion. I think Herb needs to be Herb. And I don't mean shoot more threes. I mean attack the paint, get deflections. To your point, create defense to offense. Do the things that he's been doing these last couple games where you look at the box score, you be like, that don't tell the story. That's the Herb that got this team to the playoffs last year. That's the Herb that people said should be first team all defense his second year. Like, that's the Herb that you need for this particular team. Same thing with Najee. Don't need Najee to be doing behind the back passes and stuff like that. Najee, bring the effort defensively, take it to the rack, get to the free throw line, hit an open shot every now and then. Be your role. Same thing for Jose. He's been shooting the 3-ball more, but he's the best when he's attacking the basket. He's small and he gets a shot block, but if he's able to consistently put pressure on the rim, that makes it easier for Larry. That makes it easier for JV. He's able to get somebody else involved, right? Like, those things happen when you just play your natural role. Everyone wanted to show what they've grown and show what they've been able to do, right? The things that make these each player special individually are the things that make the team great, right? Like, when you stop doing what you do best, all of a sudden the team is not as good, right? And so CJ, get back to shooting. CJ, get back to catch and shoots, playing off Brandon Ingram. Brandon Ingram is the answer. We talked about it weeks ago. He's the answer moving forward, right? he was the reason this team was, or everyone was talking about this team because of the growth of Brandon Ingram. And it's not so much the last couple games he's gotten to his rhythm and his ability to score, but it's been his playmaking. It's been his setting it up for Trey. Like Trey shooting 40% from three since BI got back, and Trey was in a slump. It's almost like he saw his twin and was like, now I feel whole again, right? Like he's been playing much differently, right? Everyone's a little bit more open. Larry Nance having a little bit more easy dunks underneath the basket. Like if BI is elevating the team the way a superstar does, that's how this team drags itself to either a 4, 5, 6 seed while Zion's still injured. That's how this team is successful moving forward. So it's not you need to do more. In my opinion, you need to do more. You need to do more. It's more, you need to bring what you bring night in and night out. Like this team should never get out hustled. Like they led the league in steals after the All-Star break. Like they should never be out rebounded because that's what the makeup of this team is. That's the identity that Willie Green talks about. And so really, if you lean in on that, I think that should be enough, especially with some of the games that you have on the schedule moving forward. So before All-Star break comes, before you get to hit the reset button, before everyone regroups and makes their final push, there are 2 more games to go this week. So tonight versus OKC here in about 5 minutes where it tips off. You got a tough team, not a team that people really expected to be this competitive without missing Chet Holmgren for an entire year. But Shai Gilgeous, man, he's a different level. Like he has gotten good every year. And I think he's always been really good, but like the Thunder have been really like secretive about him just sitting out for like the rest of the season for like a fingernail and stuff like that. But he's shown you his ability, and they're right in the hunt for the play-in. They're playing really good basketball. They're top 5 in steals. They're top 10 in taking care of the ball. So they're not giving the ball up, and they're taking the ball away. They don't have a ton of talent surrounding Shai right now. You've got Giddey, you've got good role pieces and things like that. But what do you see out of this matchup that it's kind of a game that the Pelicans kind of need to kind of get some momentum and head into the break?
Yeah, I think that this is one that they should say we have to get this one, right? We have to get this one. Shai is incredible. He is a phenomenal player. He's one of my favorite players to watch in the league. He just makes everything so effortless. And what I'm concerned about is the pick and roll defense. Shai is a master at it. And the mid-range game is where he lives. He literally lives in the mid-range. And so the drop coverage. It's going to be very difficult, so I expect to see a lot of Larry Nance tonight. But you know, this is a game where you have a young, scrappy team. We just talked about, you just mentioned about like the effort plays, right? The energy, the scrappiness, the dirty work stats, rebounding, steals, deflections, things like that. This is a team that does that, right? They are young and scrappy and get into the into defensive and all of that. You have Lou Dort, which is their version of Herb. Just a lot of guys that are trying to make a name for themselves in the league, and so they play like it, right? They play like their careers and lives depend on it. And so you have to bring the energy. You have to be able to attack mismatches when you see them. They don't really have a lot of big men. So JV, this is an opportunity before he gets pick and rolled off the floor to attack, give him the ball, let him work down low on Jeremiah Robinson Earl and guys like that. So, this is the type of games that they have Shai, and then after that is like Giddey. You have Brandon Ingram, CJ, and JV. These are 3 you can pretty much call Brandon Ingram a veteran now with the amount of games he's played and things like that. You have 3 veteran, experienced players against one of the teams that's as young as the Pelicans, probably way younger. Right. And so, go out there and show that this is a team that, still that is led by their stars, able to compete in games like that.
All right. And so you go against them. Again, they're a high-scoring team, 3rd in the league. And then you finish off the beginning of the first half of the season versus the Lakers in L.A. LeBron's dealing with an ankle issue. Something tells me he'll be ready to play versus the Pelicans.
Oh, absolutely.
They just made their trade. They made a roster moves that made sense, which everyone was mad about because everybody wanted Malik Beasley. Everybody wanted Jared Vanderbilt. But I still think the Pelicans are a better team. I just think all around from top to bottom, even without Zion, I think that's a game you could go to LA and beat them and head into the break with some momentum. And so the thing that stands out is the transition defense, because last time versus the Lakers, that's how they got out to a lead. They're one of the top scorers in transition. If the Pelicans can stop them there and make them work in the half court, I think they've got an advantage of that game. So what are you looking for out of that game from the last game before the break?
Yeah, I expect LeBron to play. I absolutely 100% expect LeBron to play. And so if LeBron's going to play, there's going to be he's going to be looking to get in transition, get in the paint, test the lack of shot rim protection that the Pelicans have. And so you have to build a wall in front of him. If he's not there, you have to shift that wall to Anthony Davis. Get him out of his game, because there have been a couple of games where it shows that, if they're not involving him and he's checked out, right? He checked out of a couple of games. And so get him in a position where, he's fighting through bodies in order to score and things like that. He can still be AD at any given time. So you have to make sure that you're respectful of that. And like you said, the guys around it, they're still finding their way on that team, but I still don't think that team is great. I don't think that they are better than the Pelicans. I agree. And so that is an opportunity where Brandon Ingram, he gets up for these big games, right? And it's always a big game when you play the Lakers. It's always a big game when you play the team that drafted you and kind of gave up on you. It's always a bbig game when Brandon Ingram plays against LeBron, which is the guy who kind of drove get the young talent out of here, bring me AD. And so these are the games that you want to be respected as one of the guys. These are the type of games that you go out and you play well in. And so I'm going to be looking for Brandon Ingram to make a mark in that game and to announce his return back to being BI.
Right. So with that being said, tip off here is in a couple minutes. What you got left for the people, Garrick?
As always, you never know what people are going through, so give somebody a smile today. These are very familiar waters for the Pelicans and for Pels fans moving forward. This is the opportunity for the young guys and some of these other guys to kind of step up and keep this team afloat while you wait on Zion's hamstring or the Pelicans to find that doctor who has all the ways to prevent hamstrings from going. So as always, follow myself at Garrick_Rattler. Follow my brother at Raphael_Rattler. Follow us on Twitter at PelsPod and on Instagram at Pels Podcast. And we'll see you guys next week.